Welcome back to the Extremamente interviews. Today in a special version. In fact, we are in Cremona at the conference The True Story of Project Blue Book, Colonel Carroll and Flying Saucers. And the guest here next to me is also special, Raymond Szymanski. So please, introduce yourself. Who is Raymond Szymanski?
Well, Raymond Szymanski was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, in a large family, and I always had an interest in things that went overhead, especially when the American space program, so I'd go out on the backyard and gaze up in the air and hope to catch a space capsule, that kind of thing. And went to college at the University of Detroit, went to high school at De La Salle, very prestigious institutions. Went to work at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I worked there for 40 years. And in my retirement, I decided to truly investigate flying saucers. And I wound up writing 3 books, nonfiction, about flying saucers.
But you were skeptical at first. And then?
Yes, I'd heard many of the stories around the water cooler at Wright-Patterson about the aliens and Hangar 18 and Project Blue Book. And so it just seemed to be swirling around constantly. And I figured one day when I had time, as I was nearing retirement, I really wanted to do a deep dive. I wanted to discover if there's any truth to it. And so what I did is I took very well documented cases, and I decided to poke holes in those cases. And if I could, I would just do nothing but play golf. But the more I tried to poke the holes in those cases, like Travis Walton, Rendlesham Forest, the incident at Exeter, the more knowledge I was accumulating that these things were not fiction, that these were fact. So I went from I want to find something out about it, to going, there is some definite substance to this, and I need to go deeper.
In this book, Swamp Gas, My Ass, it's difficult to translate exactly in Italian, but we understand what you mean. In this book, which is the most important story you tell us?
I think the most important story is Colonel Carroll's story, because up until Colonel Carroll came forward, the world believed that it wasn't swamp gas like Dr. Hynek said, but it could have been anything else. But in Swamp Gas, My Ass, Colonel Carroll comes forward, a highly decorated American hero, and he breaks his 50 years of silence, and he says, this was not swamp gas I was chasing at 1,000 miles an hour in my F-106. This was a solid silver craft that did incredible things like stop in midair or outrace the fastest jet on the planet and then make an impossible maneuver at 90 degrees. So it's his story repelling all of the disinformation that the government put out, at least for this particular event in Michigan. It's his story, that's the most important piece there, and it's provable, because his official military records are in that book. And it shows that he was a fighter pilot, it shows that he was F-106, it shows that he was at Selfridge Air Force Base, which is the closest Air Force base to all that activity, right during the days, weeks, and months when it was going on. So all of that is cemented for all time. It's well documented.
So what happened in Michigan almost 60 years ago?
Dozens of police officers were spotting and reporting flying saucers to their bosses. This was unprecedented. And not only were individual officers doing it, but many of them were grouped together with a partner, and they both reported the same thing. And when you look at the stories that were put together by the writer from the Ann Arbor News, you can see the corroboration, and you can quickly determine that they were watching the same event happen from geographically dispersed areas. So it's a kind of a story that supports the story. But apart from all of the police reports, two major incidents happened which brought it to national attention. On the 20th of March in Dexter, Michigan, a flying saucer landed on the property of Frank Manor. He and his son went outside to see why the dogs were disturbed. And when they got out there, they saw this craft, and they got within 300 feet of it. And they were able to describe it in small infinitesimal detail. And then the police arrived because the neighbors had seen the craft come down. So they reported it, and while the Manors were out chasing the flying saucer, the police were showing up in dozens and dozens, and they wound up chasing flying saucers through his property for 5 hours. The very next day, the 21st of March in 1966, at Hillsdale College, only about 50 miles away, 90 witnesses, including 80 co-ed students at the university, watched a flying saucer hover only 100 yards away for 4 hours. And police officers reported to the scene, and they filed reports. So you had weeks of all of this UFO activity, and then you had the famous Dexter and Hillsdale sighting with hundreds of witnesses, all kinds of police officers, and it was irrefutable, except to the government.
Exactly. What did the government about this event? Project Blue Book studied, and what the result?
Future President Gerald Ford was contacted by his constituents and other representatives of Congress, and his office called Project Blue Book, and they sent Dr. Hynek and a couple of young Air Force officers to investigate. So Dr. Hynek spent 2.5 days down there, and he interviewed witnesses, but he did so with a high level of dishonesty, because many people don't know that he stayed at the house of a University of Michigan professor, and it was that professor who put forward the swamp gas theory. Dr. Hynek latched onto that and then decided the only people he was going to record their testimony is if they talked about lights in the sky. If they said they saw an object, he didn't want to talk to them because it would dispute the swamp gas theory that he already had in his pocket. So he did 2.5 days of investigation. He ignored the witnesses. He changed witness testimony. He diminished other witnesses by saying they were too far away or they were ignorant and they gave him a bad report. It was all a cover-up. And then he went in front of a big press conference and he told the world it was the spontaneously combusting gas from rotting vegetation, swamp gas.
Nobody really believed this explanation.
Nobody believed it. Many newspaper articles surprisingly printed this distrust. President Ford so disbelieved it, future President Ford so disbelieved it, that he called a congressional investigation, and he took the Secretary of the Air Force, the highest ranked civilian in the Air Force, he called him to Washington. He called Major Hector Quintanilla, head of Blue Book, called him to Washington. Dr. Hynek, they all showed up and they stood in front of a congressional panel and they asked them these questions. Well, the testimony is available in our congressional record. You can find it online. Anybody can find it online. And when you read that congressional testimony, what you discover is each and every one of them lied. They lied about what they saw, they lied about swamp gas, they lied about the weather, they lied about the witnesses, they lied about what the witnesses saw, because they got together and they got their stories straight and they all told the same lies. And that's what happened at the congressional investigation. And then it died. People lost interest. It was never, well, it was pursued to the effect that Congress funded the University of Colorado with Dr. Edward Condon to do a study, but that study was even a bigger cover-up. So it was a cover-up of a cover-up, and that report by Dr. Condon is what killed Project Blue Book. They said there's no reason at all to investigate flying saucers, and the Condon report was the final straw.
Colonel Carroll kept the secret almost 5 or 6 decades. Why then did he decide to tell you the truth?
Colonel Carroll decided to tell me the truth because I'm very persuasive. And I had found enough clues. As a researcher, you know, it's like a painting. It's like a impressionist painting where they have all these little dots. And eventually the picture comes into focus. So through my network and other facts that I had gathered, I was able to find out where he lived. And I went over to his house and introduced myself and said, I heard you were a fighter pilot and that you might have been stationed at Selfridge Air Force Base in the 60s, and I'd like to talk to you. And so he wanted to know more about me, and I told him about my 2 books. So he had me bring the books over to him, and he read them, and then he called me a few weeks later, and he said, you want to talk to me? And so he gave up the ghost because he was dying of cancer. And he said, I think the world needs to know this, and because of that, I'm going to tell you my story.
What was the purpose of Project Blue Book? The discovery of the truth or its cover-up?
Initially, it was to investigate. And it was started in 1947 after the Roswell incident and the Kenneth Arnold, which we mentioned earlier. And so for a handful of years, they tried to do investigation. They hated doing it. They didn't want to do it, but they were forced to do it. But in 1953, the Central Intelligence Agency saw how poorly the Air Force handled the 1952 invasion of Washington, D.C. And they were convinced that there was something to this phenomenon. And the Air Force had done a terrible job of covering it up. So they decided they were going to look into it and be serious. So Dr. Robertson headed up a panel of about 6 good scientists, and they invited people like Dr. James McDonald, Dr. Hynek, Major Quintanilla from Blue Book, to come in and tell them what they knew about the phenomenon. Well, what the Central Intelligence Agency and Dr. Robertson had basically concluded was flying saucers were not a problem. Flying saucers were not attacking us. The problem was they were generating so many reports and keeping so many of our resources tied up investigating these reports that if we were ever to get into another war, because this is like 1953 at this point, that our communication channels would be jammed and we would not be able to conduct that next war. So we had to disinterest the public so they would stop generating UFO reports. And the Central Intelligence Agency recommended that an education program be started to make people feel stupid who report them, to do whatever they can to get people to stop filing the UFO reports.
And now, do you think we are really living in an era of disclosure?
I don't believe that disclosure of flying saucers is universal in the United States government. I believe there are factions and certain senators and representatives that want to see this for intellectual satisfaction, spiritual satisfaction. There's some reason, transparency to gain the confidence maybe of the United States citizens again. There's some reason that one faction wants to disclose it. But there is a long, long history and many people that do not want it disclosed. And they will do anything they can to keep that from happening. And so I think the battle is moving back and forward, and the disclosure people have gained a lot of ground. And I would say right now it's a standoff. So we have to see what happens during this presidency and see if we actually get the truth of everything that we know.
Thank you very much, Ray Szymanski. Thank you.
You're welcome, and we have one final. We will say goodbye from the Men in Black. Fade.